good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this. Know that I appreciate you. It is I, Coach Jay, also known as Juaitan Robinson, your resident coach, mentor, speaker, active blogger, vlogger, podcaster, and course creator. And I believe that I'm going to put this up on both channels only because the previous video that I did, I mentioned this video here. And I believe that I'm going to be putting that video up on both channels as well. And I will either link it somewhere, iCard it, or put it in the description box somewhere, the previous video, if I remember to do that. But I wanted to talk about something that I mentioned at the end of that video, where I got a revelation about something that used to bother me quite a bit. And I'm so glad that I got the revelation about it yesterday so that I don't hinder myself with that aggravation in this year. So that I don't hinder myself with that aggravation in this year. It is an unnecessary weight that I don't have to take into this year. And that's really what aggravation, frustration, anger, that's really what those things are. They're weights. And if we can get rid of them, then by all means, let's do our part to get rid of them. So this is something that has frustrated me, that has aggravated me for years in the church. For years. When the pastor gets up there and he's preaching good, the minister, the evangelist, the bishop, the whomever it is, whomever the clergy is, gets up in the pulpit and he's preaching good, or she's preaching good, and they say, touch your neighbor and, or grab your neighbor by the hand and, or tell your neighbor this, that, or the other. And there's actually one pastor that says it, and he says it in a funny way. He says touch your neighbor or grab your neighbor, but he says for you to grab elbows because there's too many people that don't wash their hands. And I think that that is hilarious. I like the way that he put that. But it used to frustrate me to hear a pastor, a minister, or whatever, clergy, in the pulpit say to touch your neighbor or tell your neighbor. Because it's like, if I'm so busy telling them and touching them, then I'm not catching what it is that you're saying. I'm not grasping what it is that you're saying. You are awfully close. If I'm always touching and telling them. And I got the revelation yesterday about why touching and telling is so important. And I don't know the exact scriptures, but I do know that the Bible tells us about touching and telling. The Bible speaks to touching and telling. In Matthew, he talks about, the Word of God talks about touching. And in Proverbs, the Word of God talks about telling. Matthew 18, I believe. Proverbs, I don't remember what the chapter is. But respectively, they talk about touching and telling, touching and telling. In Matthew, it talks about touching, where two or more are gathered together in His name. That's where you're touching and agreeing. That's where you're touching and agreeing. So if the clergy is saying to you, if the man or woman of God is saying to you that you need to touch your neighbor or grab your neighbor by the hand, what you are essentially doing is touching and agreeing on that thing that the clergy, the pastor, the minister, the bishop, the evangelist has spoken in that moment. And if what that person has spoken in that moment lines up with the will of God, you are touching and agreeing on that thing with someone else who believes it as well. And it is for your benefit. Now, the tell your neighbor, that's a twofold kind of thing for me. It's a twofold kind of thing. The tell your neighbor, in Proverbs, it mentions that the power of life and death is in the tongue. The power of life and death is in the tongue. So those things that you speak about, you can either bring life to or bring death to. You also hear about speaking things into existence. Actually, it's threefold now. You also hear about speaking things into existence. So when you do that, when you're telling your neighbor something, when you're saying something that the clergy, the pastor, the minister, the evangelist, the bishop has told you to say, you are speaking life into a thing. You are speaking it into existence. You are giving that thing either life or death. You are killing that thing, or you are bringing that thing into existence. Those are two things. The third thing is when you speak something, when you hear yourself speak something, it carries more weight in your spirit, in your mind. It carries more weight than if you just said it to yourself. Saying it in your mind. If you speak it out loud, it carries more weight in your spirit, in your mind. It carries more weight. So not only are you touching and agreeing, and not only are you giving something life or killing something off, not only are you speaking something into existence, but you're making that thing sound more real to yourself when you speak it out loud. So I love the fact that God has given me that revelation, because now I will not be frustrated by that tell your neighbor or touch your neighbor, touch your neighbor, tell your neighbor. I won't be frustrated by that thing, because I know that there is some power in it. There's something that carries weight in it. It carries weight if I indeed do it. So think of it that way. If you've never thought of it that way before, think of it that way. You are touching and agreeing, and you are either killing something or bringing something to life, giving something to life. You're talking, you're speaking it into existence. And you're also making it carry more weight with you. We are prone to do things that not only we see and not only we say to ourselves, within ourselves, but that we actually speak out loud. We are prone to doing it more. So if I say to myself, I want to have an amazing year, an amazing 2020, and I just say it to myself in my mind, I'm talking to myself. It's a thought. It's a thought, essentially. But if I speak that thing, if I say that the year 2020 is going to be amazing for me, that qualifies it, that gives it some weight. I've heard myself say it, and maybe even I've had someone else has heard me say it, and they are going to believe that thing with me. They're going to believe that thing with me. So, from this point forward, if you have ever been frustrated by the touch your neighbor, tell your neighbor, know that it has some validity to it. All right, so that's it for me. I'll have another video coming soon. I've got a lot of stuff that I've got to take care of in this year. So peace and blessings. Remember to walk in your purpose and know that I appreciate you.